Hello and welcome to the video guide for Nahut. Nahut's the third boss in the Gods from the Machine operation. Honestly, just a really fun fight, one of my favorites, and a very much a change of pace. Both Tithe and Avail and Esni can be fairly chaotic. There's a lot of colors going on in the Tithe fight. There's a lot of ads, and Nahut is very different, where there's more going on in terms of mechanics, but it's relatively predictable. So once you know how to do it, it's I wouldn't say super easy, but fairly straightforward. So anyway, there's a couple distinct phases to go through. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first mechanic we should discuss for Nahut is the fact that he is a stealther, and he actually technically is somewhere in this room in stealth. So once we begin the fight, after a few seconds, you're going to get this announcement that the generator startup has initiated, and then you should be able to see him if you're in melee range. But at this point, through the first three phases of the fight, unless you use the candle to suppress him and make him visible, then he will become invisible. And here in a few seconds, you're going to see him stealth out, or not that he stealths out, but it'll be apparent to you. Now in story mode, anybody in melee range of him can see him, and whoever's holding the candle can see him. There, you see he disappeared for a second. I don't have the candle, and I'm not in melee range of him because we weren't using the candle, so he disappeared. You see there's a yellow circle above his head. That's an indicator that he's been suppressed and he has to stay visible to everyone. But that debuff will eventually expire, and anytime that the suppression debuff isn't active on him, then he'll be invisible unless you're the person holding the candle or in melee range. So again, we see here he's temporarily invisible until we use the candle. So let's talk about the candle. So anybody who has the candle is going to get this temporary ability bar with these three abilities. But you start the fight by picking up the candle. So whoever starts the fight is going to get this first. And after that, it'll depend on who it's passed to, or if it gets dropped and someone picks it up. But anyway, let's go left to right. So on the left is Suppression Burst. That's the main ability. When you click that, you'll get a very large AoE circle that when you use it will suppress everything in that area. So as long as that big AoE clips Nahut, it applies a debuff with the exact same graphic to him. And as long as that debuff is active, it lasts for 16 seconds, he will be suppressed and be unable to cloak. Now, when you use that ability, it has an internal cooldown of 40 seconds, which means you can apply it and suppress him for 16 seconds. But then when that runs out, you'll still have a little bit over half of your cooldown remaining, which means that in story mode, it's not possible for one player to hold on to the candle for the entire fight and keep him suppressed. Depending on your group composition and if everyone stays close to the boss, maybe that's fine, because as long as you know where the tank is, you kind of know where the boss is going to be. But if you want to keep him suppressed all the time, you're going to need at least two people can almost keep him suppressed all the time. 3 people can do it all the time. And it's good practice to get more people involved with this, because in hard mode, you have to have at least 4 people that know how to do it. So again, the left is the Suppress Burst. That's the one that suppresses him. The middle button is to pass the candle. So if you select someone in your ops frame, and whoever you've selected, so kind of like you were going to heal someone or something, and then you select them and then you click the middle button, that's going to pass the candle to them. Now it's important to note that is there's kind of physics involved there, where if the imaginary line between you and the person you're passing it to, if Nahut is in the way, he can't intercept the candle, which means you'll be locked out from using it for a while until he drops it on the ground, and then someone will have to go pick it up. So if you're going to pass it, just make sure you're not passing it through the boss. Like, make sure that's why it's sometimes a good idea not to use a tank, or just step back or do whatever you need to do. The one on the right is dropping the candle, which will drop it on the ground as a little yellow circle, kind of similar to where it is at the beginning of the fight. You really shouldn't ever use that ability. So one on the left to suppress him and make him be visible, the one in the middle to pass it. Okay, so you can see here a layout of the area. And for phase one, all we really care about is that inner area. After that, all we really care about is the outer area. Now I put here, you can see the same graphics for the candle mechanics, the bottom right. The thing I want to highlight here graphically are the pins and nails. Now the strategy I am going to suggest will kind of make these irrelevant, but you need to know about them because you will see them. Now you'll in story mode, you'll be able to visually see them. They have a fixed position, and there'll be a bigger one and then smaller ones. It's kind of not super, the distinction's not super relevant, but basically what happens is if you're moving him around that inner area and anybody steps into one of those AoEs, you will be stunned, and it functions as a taunt, which will force Nahut to swap to you and attack you, which if you're a DPS or healer is not desirable. So generally you want to avoid those. Now you'll see there are these vents. There's both the shorter ones and the longer ones. Those will periodically alternate between the short ones and the long ones, catching on fire and glowing. When that happens, don't stand in them because you'll take AoE damage, although it's not a one-shot, but still don't stand in them. But another thing you can use those for is if you have knockbacks. If you knock back those pins and nails into the fire, the smaller one that pins, if you knock them into the fire, they'll be destroyed. So if you're going to kite him around the inner area, you definitely will need a strategy to do that in terms of, especially your Shadow Assassins or Sage Sorcerers have their low cooldown conal knockback is great for that purpose, but just be aware of them. The strategy I'd suggest makes it kind of irrelevant, but good to know about them. Okay, so now let's talk about the main mechanics and strategy. So the main mechanic we worry about really, or actually there are really two. One is Energized Slice, which the boss, most of his attacks are conals, but he'll periodically cast Energized Slice, which then causes his conal to be far more damaging. So we don't want anybody but the tank with aggro taking that cleave. So we need to make sure we're facing him away from the group at all times. The other one that's the main tank mechanic during phase one is called Mass Distortion. Now, when we see this live, you'll see it applied. There's both a cast for it. You'll see the debuff applied on the tank. But what happens is it looks like Electronet, as you may notice, and it functions similarly for its duration, which is if you move, it does increasing damage, and it slows you. So you kind of want to be positioned where you need to be so that when you get the debuff, you can just kind of stand there. But the trick is, as soon as that debuff expires, you'll put a blue puddle centered around your current location on the ground that does AoE damage. And so you need to move out of it, but it's also important where you position those so that, if everybody just stacks in the middle, everyone will be standing in a blue puddle, and then there's kind of a problem. So what I suggest from a positioning perspective is you have the tank grab Nahut and pull him just to the edge of that inner circle. You have your healers and DPS stack in the middle, and then the tank just steps a little bit outside of the inner circle, kind of along. There's kind of a narrow walkway in between those vents, and they step a few meters onto that so that Nahut's still in the inner edge, but just on the edge of that inner circle. And then you drop a blue puddle, and then as soon as you do, you just move clockwise, counterclockwise, doesn't matter, but you kind of move out of the blue circle to the next spoke, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and you can keep working your way around. If you have multiple tanks, you can have the other tanks set up at the next position, and as soon as you get Mass Distortion, they can taunt and pull the boss to you. That's effectively how the mechanic works in hard mode. Either way, you have some flexibility. You can kind of do this how you want, but the key is that's a great way where you don't have to go outside of the inner circle far enough to worry about all those pins and nails and fire and junk, and everyone else can just stack inside, but you also have to worry about blue puddles. So I think it's really helpful. So let's take a look at this in real time. Okay, so here we go. So important thing to note is that in this particular example, I'm the tank. We're actually not going to be passing the candle. We're short manning this. Everybody in here has done it a whole bunch. So we're all just basically going to know that we need to be stacked near the boss to see him. If you have range DPS in particular, this may not be optimal. But anyway, it's what we're doing. So I'm the tank, so I pick up the candle. That starts the fight. For the first few seconds, Nahut's actually not in the middle, so you want to wait to use your suppression until you get that first notification that the Singularity Generator startup's initiated. That means he's there. If you're in melee range, you'll see him. So then you suppress him just to make sure. You can see the pins and nails are popping up. During that cast, he's preparing the field. He's laying out those pins, which means the longer that cast goes, the more of them he's going to plant. Now, if you DPS him fast enough, he actually won't plant very many, as you'll see here. So you see here where I'm stacked just outside the edge. I just got the debuff. It's counting down, and boom, there's the blue circle. Now I'm going to move him to the just a little bit to the side, and I'm just going to hold him there. There's his slash attack, no big deal. There's distortion again. Everyone's behind him, not a problem. And every time I can suppress, I'll suppress. Now, midway through this phase, he'll jump back to the middle when he reaches around 80%, and he'll do prepare the field again. And so he does that mechanic, and now we're just basically we're going to do the exact same thing again, where I'm going to grab his aggro and just hold him until I get the debuff. I'm moving to the edge of the inner circle. Now I get mass distortion. I'm going to hang out there till the debuff goes away. Counts down pretty quickly, and then we're just going to keep on moving him. Our DPS, even though we're short manning, it's actually quite high. So we only get 2 puddles or so per phase. You may get more. Those puddles do disappear, as you may have seen. Once you get him to about 60%, you push to the next phase. Okay, so now we get to phase 2, or some people may consider it a transition phase. So from this point onward, we want to be on the outer edge of the platform, on those outer circular there's 3 different sections of the platform. Because from here on out, there's going to be a singularity in the middle of the platform that is going to be dangerous to us if we get too far into the inside. So our main goal for this phase is there's going to be 2 power couplings that are going to spawn at the northwest corner of the map. They're always at that position, and there's going to be 1 on each of those little bridges connecting the platforms. Our goal is to DPS those. We don't actually kill them, but you'll DPS them down to 0%, and they'll each have like 1 point of health, and they won't take any more damage. So DPS need to move there, burn them down. Some adds will come up very near to those positions, splash damage them, but again, the main focus is to kill the power couplings. There is technically a DPS check, although it's pretty easy. The other main mechanic is that while you're doing this, the outer edges of the platform, starting with the one just clockwise of you, so kind of if you look at this as a clock at 12 o'clock, will fill with lightning, and each of those sections will fill up moving clockwise around the room until it gets to you. Now that happens regardless of how quickly you push the power couplings, but the key is if you haven't pushed the power couplings by the time the lightning catches up to you and that last platform where you're standing lights up, then it's typically a group wipe. If you have done that, all that will still happen, but once the section you're standing on, it'll fill with lightning for like a split second, and then you'll push to the next phase. So it's mostly just kind of a DPS check. There is a positional awareness / tank mechanic for this fight with regards to the railgun. Now, Nahut is not active during this phase for the most part. He's not moving. The only thing he does is he stands wherever he was positioned as you push this phase. He's going to stand there, and whoever has the candle, he's going to snipe at them. Now, there's 2 debuffs you need to be aware of. One is the brighter orange railgun snipe. That's the debuff that's applied whenever Nahut is actively targeting the player with his railgun. There'll also be a red line telegraphing the person that he's targeting. You can't LOS it, so if you hide behind these pillars, he'll still shoot you. But the key is anybody that's affected by it, because it is a conal, a very, very narrow conal, anyone that's hit by it will also get a stack of this railgun trauma, which reduces the healing you receive, reduces your maximum health by a little bit, but most importantly, it stacks. And so every stack you get causes you to take more and more damage from the railgun snipe. Because of this, it's typically not possible for one player to hold the candle that entire phase and just eat all those snipes, because by the time you get to the 5th one or the 6th one, they're taking like 300, 350%, whatever damage from it. And even for a tank, it's typically not survivable. So what I usually recommend is you have a rotation where whoever has the candle going into that phase goes and hides. Here I have it positioned like it's a tank, but it doesn't really matter. It's whoever has the candle goes and stands at that position behind the pillar so that they're away from everyone else and no one else gets the debuff. They take a rail shot. If they're a tank, then they can usually take 2 to 3 shots, no problem. If they're a DPS or a healer, they should really just take 1, and then they should pass it to somebody else. and then they can go back to the main group. Whoever gets the candle then comes out to stand where they were, again, primarily so they're away from the group, so no one else is picking up stacks or taking damage. And that's really it. You keep doing that, burn down the power couplings, and then you're through phase 2. So let's see it in real time. Okay, so we're about to push to phase 2 once we get him to about 60%. So we're just holding him in the middle. It's good to be oriented. It's going to be northwest. You see there's this red pulsing area. If you're inside that red circle, you're going to take damage, so you want to be out of it. It won't one-shot you. And then we're just going to DPS the power couplings. I have the candle, so I'm going to be targeted. There's that red line, so I'm moving out of the group. The other thing I didn't mention on the graphic, but you'll see here repeatedly, is there's this gravity pull-in mechanic from the singularity. There'll be a white line that will, a white circle that will move inward just like that, and then a few seconds later we get pulled in. So it's not a big deal. That's going to continue to happen throughout this phase and the next phase, so just be prepared for it. But again, I'm standing out here, I'm taking the rail shots. I'm at 3 stacks, so now I'm at 4 stacks. 5 is going to be a little tricky. If you've got a good defensive to pop for that last one, it's manageable. So here I'm a tank. So yeah, I did okay. If it's anyone other than a DPS, a tank, you're probably not going to survive it. Here I'm going to get a 6th shot. Again, hurts quite a bit. So just have a strategy. But anyway, once you get through that, you killed the couplings. Now it's on to phase 2. Okay, so now we're on to, well, you call it phase 2 or phase 3, depending on whether you think the previous phase was phase 2 or a transition. But on to the next phase. So this one is when it can feel a little chaotic because there's kind of a lot of different things going on, and you kind of have to split your group. So a couple things. First, Nahut will continue to stealth during this phase. So whoever has the candle, or whatever people have your candle rotation, need to keep using it to keep him visible. Or alternatively, your tank that has aggro will see him anyway, and your DPS just need to stay in melee range. You can do it either way. That mass distortion mechanic, the blue circle, is going to continue to happen. And so usually the positioning that works the best, in my experience, and this is also really good practice for hard mode, because this is essentially the tanking and kiting path for hard mode as well, is you try to hold him just to one side of each of those pillars, and you try to drop 2 or maybe 3 of the blue circles from mass distortion on one side, and then you move him in whatever direction you're moving here. I'm presenting it as counterclockwise, but it doesn't really matter. And then you move him to the other side, and you drop a couple of puddles, and then you move ahead to the next platform from side to side. And so the idea being you're dropping those as you go. The benefit to this is it makes it pretty easy for the DPS and healers to just stand more or less behind one of those pillars, so that when that gravity pull-in that keeps happening during this phase happens, they get pulled into the pillar, which means they don't lose as much uptime, they don't have to run back, they don't get pulled into the red in that inner area that's generated by the singularity, they don't get pulled into a blue puddle, and just helps keep it relatively simple to manage. But you can kind of do it however you want. It's not necessarily mandatory. And so there's that. The other thing that's going to happen is there are going to be turrets that spawn. Now this phase continues until you get rid of 5 turrets. Now Nahut, once you get him down to about 34%, he's going to shield and become invulnerable to damage. So you cannot push this phase just by damaging Nahut. So as these turrets spawn, and these are the ones I've marked are kind of some of their potential positions. They'll generally spawn one at a time. There'll be an announcement whenever they spawn. So they'll usually 1 will spawn, and then later 2 will spawn at a time. You do want to address them and deal with them, because if you ignore them, you'll never push the phase. And if you ignore them too long, they'll enrage, and then they'll start doing a lot higher damage. So usually what you do is you divide up your team, and you have about half of your DPS and probably a healer break off to deal with turrets. And so in story mode, all you do is you DPS those turrets. They have a cast that you can interrupt, especially if you're DPS to minimize your damage, but you DPS them to 39%, at which point they're going to shield themselves and stop really doing anything. And once they're shielded, the next time you get that gravity pull-in, they'll be sucked into the singularity and destroyed. And once you've sucked in 5 turrets, then you push to the next phase, which is the burn phase. So the overall goal here is to get, you want Nahut as low as you can get him, preferably to 34, because the lower he is, the easier the burn phase is. But your most important goal is to deal with turrets. Depending on your DPS, I've seen Nahut pushed in story mode at like 50% health and still burned down. So depending on your DPS, that may be important or not, but got to manage the turret, so just be aware of it, have a strategy for who are the people that are going to break off. On the one hand, melee DPS have generally more in the way of interrupts and defensives and are a bit tankier. Range DPS can be really helpful because they generally have off heals, or in the case of gunslinger snipers, really good defensives. So anybody can do it, just make sure everyone knows who's gonna do it, and that whoever's leading the op, make sure to call out to say, hey guys, let's go deal with turrets. Okay, so let's see this in real time. Okay, so here we're about to finish phase 2, or the transition phase. We're about to move to the next phase. You can see Nahut there sniping at me there. So this last platform is going to fill with lightning for just a split second, and then we're going to move on to the next phase. At this point, Nahut's going to stealth, and so you kind of have to wait. You can either wait until you see him, because whoever the tank is, they'll be able to see him. So there I tried to clip him, and I didn't exactly time it right. So I'm going to pass the candle to somebody else. And so again, what I try to do, these little kind of, whatever you call them, station platforms, whatever these are on the side, I usually put my back, so I dropped one. I'm going to put my back to the wall to get pulled in. Now I'm going to try to drop here. I'm dropping it in a little different pattern. Again, there's multiple ways to do it. I'm trying to drop these on the back edge, and then we're going to keep going, partly because I know we have really high DPS, so I'm not overly worried about needing to drop all that many puddles. So this is another alternative strategy. The only trick to doing it this way is you make it pulled in and briefly face the boss towards the group. I don't recommend this tanking strategy for hard mode, which is the main reason why it's not the way it is in the graphic. So you can see here we can't see him briefly because of his positioning. So there's a turret to my left. You see these little red lines with them targeting you. As long as they're not enraged, you can't LOS them. So the whole time we've got some of our group dealing with the boss, while other people are off dealing with, we actually just have one person dealing with turrets. You see here our group DPS in this example is really high. So we've already got the boss to 34%. So at this point, everybody else is going to go deal with turrets. There's another one over there, the path we're headed. And so really we're just at this point just stalling for time until we get 5 turrets pushed in. Depending on your group's DPS, this can take longer or not. So there's a wave of reinforcement arrives, the announcement, that means there's more turrets. And so just watch your positioning. So there's the danger tanking it the way I'm doing it here versus the graphic. If you get pulled in at the wrong time, you get stuck putting a puddle where everyone's going to stand. So just FYI that's one way to deal with it. But otherwise we're just waiting, and you'll get an announcement every time there's a pull-in. You'll get an announcement for every turret that's pulled in, so you'll see it here, hopefully here in a second. So we get pulled in, and there we go. So if the one's been destabilized, it's now critically unstable. That's your indicator you're moving on to the next phase. The boss is no longer shielded. We're now damaging them, and we're on to burn phase. Okay, so here's another example. This is actually from hard mode, but is a good example of kind of the kiting path. So again, we're holding here. The main difference from this clip is in hard mode, if he's not suppressed, you can't see him at all. But we're going to hold him there. You can see there we're holding him in that back corner. We're going to get the first pull in, and then they're going to drop a puddle there and then come back in. At that point, we did a tank swap, and so then you hold him at that position. You don't have to do a swap in story mode, you do it in hard mode. And then we're going to drop a puddle at that second position, and then we're moving to the other side, and then we get mass barrage, mass distortion rather, and again we're dropping them here. This way all of our DPS healers can stack kind of here in the middle and make it really easy for them to not get cleaved and to not have to stand in blue or any of that other stuff. So anyway, hope that's helpful. Okay, so before we talk about burn phase, let's just see this from the perspective of dealing with turrets. So here I'm DPSing, helping DPS the boss. We get him at 34%. There's the big shield, so he's immune to damage. So I'm like, okay, time to go help. I'm going to stand here to take. I find a turret behind me, so I'm going to head that direction. See, he's using his rail shot ability. You can interrupt it, as I did there. I'm just going to DPS the turret. Use defensives, interrupts. You can LOS their attacks as long as they're not enraged. Here I'm just gonna use defensives. I've got an interrupt again if I need it. but I know I'm going to push him. And so there he's pushed, he's shielded, he's not doing anything, he's going to get pulled in. And then we're going to see that graphic that there we destabilized the Singularity because we pulled in 2 turrets. So one of them was the one I just damaged, and then another one. So then we pushed another one, and you just keep doing that till you get 5. Okay, so we're finally to burn phase. Burn phase is fairly straightforward, and honestly the main thing that's important is just positioning. So you can see here there are white lines bisecting the different platforms into the really 4 sections per platform. So they're divided in the middle, and then at each of those platform stations, pillars, whatever you want to call them, midway through, that divides it into 4 sections. So the key is during this phase, we don't, in story mode, we don't have to worry about the candle. Nahut's visible no matter what, so don't have to worry about that. As soon as you push to that phase, you have about 25 seconds where he just really doesn't do anything. That, I think, is primarily intended for people that are kind of all over the platform, that we're dealing with turrets, have time to get back to the boss. So if you have everyone up that's close, that's great. If you don't, it's fine. It just means more uptime. So you burn the boss, burn the boss, burn the boss. After 25 seconds, the main mechanic starts, which is every 12 seconds, Nahut will fill the platform section that he is standing on with lightning. And so you move from platform to platform, from section to section. You move him around the room as it gradually fills with lightning. And so if your DPS is slow, or if your positioning is bad, you eventually run out of room to stand, and you're sitting there standing on a lightning platform taking AoE damage. It's not a one-shot, but it functions very effectively as a soft enrage, because if the group's standing in lightning plus the tank's taking damage from Nahut, you can't really continue to heal through that. And on top of that, we've got I believe it's the Gravitic Storm, but the red circle that we saw earlier at this point in the fight begins to expand. So as we move around the room, it's going to eventually encroach on us. And by the time we make it to, so if we started at this position, by the time we make it to the bridge at the east, so moving to our 3rd platform, the red circle will be big enough that when we cross the bridge, we'll have to take the outer one because the inner one's in the red. If you stand inside that red circle, you'll take high ticking damage. So eventually you're standing in lightning, taking damage from the boss, and you don't have anywhere safe to stand because eventually the red circle covers like the entire platform. So the key here is just to make sure that your DPS is as efficient as possible and that the tank is positioning Nahut, because you want to minimize your damage. And so the best way to tank him is for the tank to pull Nahut just past where the tank is standing, just past the kind of delineator between platform sections, but that Nahut himself is still standing on whichever section isn't covered in lightning. That way, when that platform lights up, hopefully nobody's standing on it, the tank's not standing on it, or just barely standing on it, the DPS aren't standing on it, and then you kind of don't have this continual process where you have a bunch of people standing in lightning taking damage and positioning, and it just becomes very difficult for healers. So you'll see this live, but basically just pulling from section to section to section to section, and that really, really helps. And again, you don't have to be perfect on. The DPS check's pretty generous in story mode. But the better you do that, the easier it'll be for everyone. Otherwise, for healers and DPS, range DPS, try to be as far ahead of the boss as possible. There's really no good reason for healers or range DPS to take any damage from the red circles or the lightning, because you can be way ahead of the boss. For melee DPS, it can be a little bit trickier, but try to stay behind him if you can. As much as possible. It's a little tricky because the tank is pulling Nahut towards the group, so watch your positioning and also watch your step going across those platforms. Don't die by stepping off of one. That can be awkward. And anyway, so let's see this in real time. Okay, so here we go. We're about to enter burn phase. We're about to get our gravity pull in, and that pulls in the last one. So now the Singularity is critically unstable, and now the boss is just standing here. He's attacking, but not really doing anything else. He's also going to be visible to us. So we're just attacking the boss, and we've got a little bit of downtime until we start getting lightning. And so here we go. We're going to see this happen here relatively soon. So there's the first section. So you can see here how I'm positioning the boss to be just just on the outside of that platform. And here I'm going to pull him almost to the middle. If you're not sure, it's better to leave him further onto that section rather than risk him, because if you pull him too far, then it'll be the section behind you that lights up with lightning rather than the one you're wanting. And now you kind of wasted it because you kind of have to keep moving. And so we're just going to pull him along. You can stand, like for here, you can stand just barely off the platform like this. The boss is still standing on it, so the proper one lights up as you see, and you just keep moving. Really, that's it. If you're the tank, try to face him away from the group. So kind of pull him to the edge and then turn him and just DPS him down, and pretty easy going. Okay, so that's the fight. It's really fun. I really enjoy it. Good luck in Gods. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck. Thanks. Bye.
Taken my last child from me. Now your true test begins.